When I stepped into the room, I wasn't prepared for what I was about to feel. My dress clung to me in all the right places, deep blue, silky, with a neckline that made me feel bold. It wasn't something my mom would ever approve of, but I liked how it made me feel empowered, daring. I thought I was ready for the evening, but the way my stepdad's eyes locked on mine made my heart race in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just a glance, it lingered, heavy, charged with something I wasn't ready to name. I told myself it was nothing. Just an odd moment, nothing more. After all, Ryan had always been the picture of calm and respect. He was the man who helped raise me since I was 12, who stood beside my mom during the hardest years of our lives. I respected him. Trusted him. But that look, it made me question everything. "Madeline, you look stunning," he said, his voice low and almost hesitant. He quickly averted his eyes, as if he realized he had crossed some invisible line. I forced a smile, pretending I didn't notice the tension in the air. "Thanks, Ryan. Just something new I thought I'd try." But inside, my thoughts were spinning. Had I imagined it? Was I reading too much into it? I wanted to believe it was innocent, but something about his tone, the way he looked at me, clung to my mind like a whisper I couldn't shake. It started so simply. A quiet evening, my mom out for the night, just me and Ryan in the house. We'd done this a dozen times before, nothing unusual. I was planning to watch a movie, maybe scroll through my phone, relax after a long day. But tonight, everything felt different. I walked into the kitchen, finding Ryan pouring himself a glass of wine. He glanced up, offering a small smile. "Want some?" I hesitated. It wasn't like him to offer me wine, but I wasn't exactly underage either. I was 21 now, perfectly legal, and maybe he was just trying to be friendly. Sure, why not? He handed me a glass, and for a moment, our fingers brushed. It was such a simple touch, but it sent a strange shiver up my spine. I took a sip, trying to push the thought away, trying to convince myself that this was just another normal evening. But it wasn't normal. Not at all. We ended up sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The wine was good, too good. It loosened my thoughts, made everything feel softer, more relaxed. Ryan sat across from me, his posture casual, but his eyes, they kept flicking to me when he thought I wasn't looking. "So, how's school?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too casual. "Fine," I said, setting my glass down. "Busy, but manageable." He nodded, but there was something in his expression that made me feel like he wanted to ask more, like there was something unsaid hanging between us. The silence stretched, thick with something I couldn't name. I felt his eyes on me again, lingering longer than they should have, and I suddenly felt too warm, too exposed. I shifted in my seat, crossing my legs and adjusting the hem of my dress. His gaze followed the movement, and for a split second, I saw it, that flicker of something forbidden, something dangerous. My heart skipped a beat. "Madeline," he began, but then stopped, as if thinking better of it. "What?" I asked, my voice steady, though my pulse was anything but. He shook his head, taking another sip of his wine. "Nothing. Just, you've grown up so much." There it was again. That edge in his voice, that hint of something more than simple admiration. I didn't know whether to feel flattered or frightened. Maybe a bit of both. I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, it happens. Time, you know?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something else in that smile, something that made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground beneath me crumbling. I told myself I was imagining things. That it was just the wine, just the late hour making everything feel more intense than it really was. But as the night went on, that tension didn't fade, it grew. Every glance, every word, seemed charged with an unspoken electricity, and I didn't know how to handle it. "Madeline," Ryan said suddenly, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Can I be honest with you about something?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone light, casual, though inside, I was anything but calm. He set down his glass, leaning forward slightly, his eyes locked on mine. "I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but sometimes I forget you're not a kid anymore." The room seemed to tilt, the air growing heavier around us. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what he expected me to say. All I knew was that something was happening, something I didn't understand, something that felt dangerously close to crossing a line. "Thanks, I guess," I said awkwardly, trying to laugh it off, but my voice sounded too high, too forced. Ryan smiled again, that same not quite right smile, and suddenly, I felt like I needed to get out of there. I stood up, setting my glass down with a little too much force. "I should probably head to bed. Early class tomorrow." "Of course," he said quickly, standing as well. "Good night, Madeline." "Good night," I murmured, turning and walking away as quickly as I could without running. But even as I climbed the stairs and shut the door to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had changed something. That nothing would ever be quite the same again. Little did I know that night was only the beginning. The start of something I wasn't ready for, something I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. And trust me, what happened next was something I never saw coming. Ever since Ryan revealed his secret, I hadn't been able to find peace. His confession had been heavy, but it was the look in his eyes that haunted me, the raw honesty, the quiet pain. It made me feel something I wasn't prepared to face. He wasn't just a stepfather trying to share something difficult, he was a man grappling with emotions he couldn't control. And somehow, I felt caught in the middle, unable to pull away. Whenever we were alone, the air between us seemed charged, crackling with unspoken words and unresolved tension. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking everything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. Ryan was different. I was different. And whatever this was, it was slowly pulling us both into something I didn't know how to handle. I started avoiding him, at least, I tried. I would leave the room whenever he entered, keep conversations short, pretend to be busy with schoolwork. But it didn't help. If anything, the distance only made things worse. Every time I caught his gaze lingering on me, every time our hands accidentally brushed when we passed each other, my heart would race, my mind spiraling into chaos. Was I imagining things? Was this wrong? Should I confront him, or should I pretend nothing had changed? The questions kept swirling in my mind, keeping me up at night, making it impossible to focus on anything else. One evening, as I was sitting on my bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, there was a soft knock on my door. My pulse quickened immediately. I didn't have to guess who it was. "Madeline?" Ryan's voice was quiet, hesitant. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, every instinct telling me to say no, to send him away. But something else, a curious, reckless part of me, whispered that I needed to hear him out. I took a deep breath and opened the door. He stood there, looking almost as uncertain as I felt. There was something vulnerable in the way he held himself, like he was afraid of what might happen next. I wanted to make sure we're okay," he said, his voice low. "We're fine," I said quickly, too quickly. "Everything's fine." He didn't look convinced. "It doesn't feel fine, Madeline. I don't want things to be weird between us." "It's not weird," I lied, forcing a smile. "Really?" He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I know this isn't easy. I didn't mean to put you in an awkward position. I care about you. A lot. And I didn't want to keep things bottled up anymore." His words hit me harder than I expected. There was no malice in them, no hidden agenda, just raw, honest emotion. It made it even harder to push him away, even though I knew I should. "Ryan, I don't know what you want from me," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing," he said quickly. "I don't expect anything from you." I just needed you to know how I feel." Silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to run, to escape before things got even more complicated. But another part, the part that kept me standing there, staring into his eyes, wanted to understand him, to figure out why I couldn't seem to walk away. "I should go," he said after a moment, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I just didn't want to leave things like this." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He gave me a small, almost sad smile before turning to leave. As I watched him walk away, a strange mix of relief and longing washed over me, leaving me more confused than ever. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. His words, his expression, the way he looked at me, it all felt too real, too intense. I knew I should draw a line, make it clear that nothing could happen between us. But the truth was, I didn't want to. I didn't know what I wanted. All I knew was that something had changed, and there was no going back. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice, felt the tension that lingered between us. It was maddening, this constant push and pull, this battle between what I knew was right and what I couldn't seem to stop feeling. And the worst part? I had no idea where this was headed, but I knew it wasn't over. The situation was becoming more dangerous with every passing day. It was as though the walls of the house carried the weight of the unspoken, trapping us in this thick, suffocating atmosphere. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt heavier than it should have. I told myself I could keep my distance, that if I just avoided him, it would all blow over. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, the house was eerily quiet. My mom had called to say she'd be working late, and I had planned to spend the evening alone, maybe watching TV or scrolling through my phone. But just as I sat on the couch, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Madeline, Ryan's voice was soft but deliberate, carrying that same unshakable intensity I'd been trying to ignore. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable but his presence magnetic. "What's out?" I asked, keeping my tone light, though my heart was already racing. He hesitated, his hand gripping the doorframe for support. "We need to talk," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I know this is wrong. I know I shouldn't say this. But I can't keep pretending everything's fine." The words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to steady myself. "Ryan, you don't have to." "Please," he interrupted, stepping closer. "Just let me say this." I froze, torn between wanting to run and needing to hear him out. The room felt smaller with every step he took, the space between us shrinking until there was nowhere left to hide. "Ever since that night," he began, his eyes locking onto mine, "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong, Madeline. God, I know. But I can't control it. I don't even know when it started. All I know is that you're not a kid anymore. You're incredible. Smart, beautiful, confident. And every time I look at you, it gets harder to keep this to myself." My head was spinning. His words were everything I had feared and more. I wanted to yell at him, to tell him to stop, but the vulnerability in his voice kept me rooted to the spot. "Ryan, this can't happen," I said, my voice trembling. "You're married to my mom. This is wrong." "I know," he whispered, his expression pained. "But don't you feel it too? Don't tell me you haven't noticed the way we are around each other." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course, I had noticed. I had felt it in every glance, every lingering moment. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, and I wasn't ready for that. "It doesn't matter what I feel," I said, trying to sound firm. "It can't happen, Ryan. It just can't." He took another step closer, his eyes pleading. "I don't want to hurt you, Madeline. Or your mom. But I also can't keep lying to myself. I just. I need to know if there's even a chance. There isn't, I said quickly, though my voice betrayed me with its shakiness. There can't be. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was unbearable, a silent storm brewing between us. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle he was fighting within himself. And I hated that part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort him, even though I knew it would only make things worse. I'm sorry, he finally said, his voice barely audible. I shouldn't have said anything. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. My heart was pounding, my thoughts a chaotic mess. He turned and left the room, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of what had just happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind, his voice filled with an honesty that made it impossible to hate him. I wanted to believe he was just confused, that this was all some horrible misunderstanding. But the truth was, I had felt it too. That pull, that connection, as wrong as it was. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but every time I saw him, I felt my defenses crumble. He didn't say anything more, but the way his eyes followed me, the way he lingered just a moment too long, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. Not even close. I told myself I could stop it. That I could draw a line and keep everything from spiraling out of control. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Because the truth was, part of me didn't want it to stop. And that scared me more than anything else. The tension had reached its peak, suffocating and impossible to ignore. Days passed, but the distance I tried to maintain only seemed to draw Ryan closer. It was as though the silence between us had become a language of its own, speaking louder than words ever could. I wanted to believe I could control this, that I could resist whatever invisible force was pulling us together, but the truth was, I was losing that battle. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson, Ryan knocked on my door. I froze at the sound, every instinct screaming at me to pretend I wasn't home. But something in the weight of that knock told me this was inevitable. This moment was coming, whether I wanted it or not. Madeline, he called softly, his voice steady but tinged with something raw, something vulnerable. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Finally, I pulled it open, finding him standing there, his eyes heavy with emotion. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded silently, stepping aside to let him in. He walked past me, his movements careful, almost hesitant, as though he was afraid of breaking something fragile. I closed the door, my heart pounding in my chest, and turned to face him. "Madeline," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I shouldn't be here. I know I should let this go. But I can't." My breath caught in my throat as he stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "I've tried," he continued, his voice cracking. "I've tried to push these feelings away, to bury them, but it's impossible. I can't pretend anymore." "Ryan, please don't," I started, but he cut me off, his words spilling out in a torrent. "I've always felt something for you," he confessed, his voice heavy with emotion. "Something I can't explain, something I can't control. It's not just about how you look, Madeline. It's who you are. The way you carry yourself, the way you see the world. You're everything." His words hit me like a wave, crashing over me and leaving me breathless. I wanted to tell him to stop, to leave, to never say these things again. But I couldn't. Because as much as I hated to admit it, part of me needed to hear them. "Ryan," I whispered, my voice shaking, "this isn't right. You know that." "I know," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "But tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me I'm the only one." His eyes burned into mine, pleading, searching for an answer I wasn't ready to give. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I wanted to run, but my feet refused to move. Instead, I stood there, my heart pounding, my thoughts spiraling. I don't know, I admitted finally, my voice barely audible. I don't know what I feel. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out as though to touch me but stopping just short. Madeline, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt your mom. But this, whatever this is, it's real. And it's killing me to keep it inside. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at him, seeing the pain etched into his face. I hated him for putting me in this position, for making me question everything I thought I knew. But I hated myself even more for not pushing him away. Please, he said, his voice breaking. Just tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. I can't, I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. I don't know how. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of our emotions pressing down on us like a storm about to break. Then, without warning, he closed the distance between us, his hands gently cupping my face. I should have stopped him, should have stepped back. But I didn't. Madeline, he whispered, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. And then he kissed me. It was soft, tentative, as though he was testing the waters, waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. The world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of us, suspended in that moment. It was wrong. It was dangerous. But it was also undeniable. When we finally broke apart, I stared at him, my heart racing, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Ryan, we can't, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But it's too late, isn't it? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. When it happened, I was left stunned, trapped in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Guilt and the forbidden thrill clashed inside me, creating a chaos I couldn't escape. The weight of what we had done settled over me like a storm, heavy and suffocating. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind kept replaying every second, every glance, every touch. Was it wrong? Absolutely. But a part of me didn't regret it, and that terrified me more than anything else. The next morning, everything felt different. The house was quiet, but not in the comforting way it used to be. Now, it felt fragile, like the slightest move could shatter it all. I went downstairs, pretending everything was normal, but deep inside, I knew nothing ever would be again. Ryan was already in the kitchen, sipping his coffee like it was just another day. He looked up when I entered, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to gauge where we stood after last night. I avoided his gaze, my heart pounding as I poured myself a glass of water. Morning, he said, his voice too casual, too forced. Morning, I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as I could manage. I didn't dare look at him too long, afraid of what I might see, or what he might see in me. Before either of us could say more, the front door opened, and my mom walked in. Her cheerful voice filled the room as she greeted us, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I forced a smile, but every second felt like walking on a razor's edge. The day dragged on painfully slow. I tried to keep busy, anything to distract myself from the weight of what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. And I was right. That evening, while we were all sitting in the living room, my mom suddenly turned to me with a strange look in her eyes. Madeline, is everything okay? You've seemed different lately. My heart stopped. I could feel Ryan tense beside me, though he kept his face carefully neutral. I'm fine, I said quickly, too quickly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she could see right through my lie. Are you sure? You've been quiet. And you and Ryan, you're acting a little strange. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had noticed. I should have known. My mom was too perceptive to miss something like this. I struggled to come up with an excuse, something that would make sense without raising more suspicion. We're fine, Ryan said, stepping in before I could speak. His voice was calm, steady, like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Madeline's just been stressed with school lately. You know how it is." She didn't look entirely convinced, but she didn't press the issue further. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, grateful for Ryan's quick thinking. But the relief was short-lived. I knew this wasn't over. She was suspicious, and it was only a matter of time before she started asking more questions. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of everything crashed down on me. What had we done? How had we let it get this far? And more importantly, how were we supposed to move forward from here? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated. My mom wasn't going to let this go, and I didn't know how long we could keep pretending everything was fine. The secret we shared was too big, too dangerous, and it felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. But the scariest part? A small, twisted part of me didn't want to go back to how things were. Despite the guilt, despite the fear, part of me wanted more. And that thought alone was enough to make my heart race. The next few days were tense. My mom's suspicions didn't seem to fade, and every conversation felt like a minefield, each word carefully chosen to avoid setting off an explosion. Ryan and I barely spoke, keeping our distance as much as possible. But even then, the tension lingered, thick and inescapable. One evening, just as I thought things were calming down, my mom dropped a bombshell. "I've been thinking," she said casually over dinner, "maybe we should take a family trip. You know, just the three of us. Get away for a bit." Panic flared in my chest. A trip? Being stuck together, pretending everything was normal? It sounded like a nightmare. That sounds great," I said, forcing a smile. "But with school and everything, I don't know if I'll have the time." "Nonsense," she said, waving off my excuse. "You need a break." "We all do. Besides, it'll be good for us." Ryan didn't say anything, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. He knew as well as I did that this trip could either save us or destroy everything. And that's where things stand now. A family trip, a ticking time bomb, and a secret too big to keep hidden forever. I don't know what's going to happen next, but one thing's for sure, it's only going to get more complicated. What do you think I should do? Should I tell my mom the truth, or try to keep this secret buried? Let me know in the comments. I need all the advice I can get.